I've told a lot of wilderness stories on this channel, some of them tragic, some of them bizarre, some of them just plain stupid, to be honest. But this one just hits differently. In 1975, a 19-year-old boy named Charles McCullar walked into the snow-covered backcountry of Crater Lake National Park and then just disappeared without a trace. And what happened next was so bizarre, so disturbing, that it left even experienced park rangers completely speechless, and the boy's own father literally writing page after page of unhinged letters to the FBI. The disappearance of Charles McCullar isn't just unsettling, it feels wrong. Like, I don't know, something about it just doesn't belong in the real world, let alone in a beautiful national park like Crater Lake. And at the end of the video, when you learn what they ended up uncovering, you're gonna understand why this case still haunts the National Park Service to this day. And so with that said, right now we're gonna pack our bags and take a trip to Oregon's only national park, once again, Crater Lake. Now this trip is totally free, but it will cost you one simple click of that subscribe button, dude. We're trying to reach 1 million subscribers by the end of the year, and frankly, it's starting to feel like one long through hike. We've come so far already, like over 700,000 subscribers, and yet somehow we still have just miles and miles and subscribers left to go. So I would really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button and help us out. Okay, let's head to Crater Lake. Now, if you're not familiar with Crater Lake National Park, I'll give you just a bit more background on what it has to offer. I've been there before. It's beautiful. The lake itself is just amazing. And it even has this like mysterious island in the middle of the lake called Wizard Island. Oh, and it also has this 30-foot log that's been bobbing perfectly upright back and forth around the lake for over 100 years. Like, you can fact check me on that. I promise you that's true. Oh, and this log even has a name, which the locals call the Old Man in the Lake. And to be honest with you guys, those facts don't have anything to do with this story, but it just goes to show that there's a lot of mystery and just weird stuff related to Crater Lake. And to be honest with you, there really is no mystery there as strange as the story of Charles McCullar. So in January of 1975, a young photographer from Virginia, once again, Charles McCullar, well, he's in the middle of this cross-country road trip to take photographs of various national parks. His trip took him through states like Texas, Arizona, and eventually up to the beautiful college town of Eugene, Oregon. Along the way, it was totally normal for Charles to take multiple modes of transportation. He would drive his own Volkswagen van, but he would also take public buses, and he would even stick out his thumb and hitchhike from time to time. This road trip feels like it might have been one that was inspired by like the tragic final journey of Christopher McCandless, for instance. And looking back at how everything began, I mean, this was clearly supposed to be like a magical coming of age story for a young man in the prime of his life. But unfortunately, the rest of this story is anything but magical, as you're soon going to find out. So once he had arrived in Eugene, Charles stayed at a friend's apartment for a few days before setting out on a planned excursion to Crater Lake. And again, it's absolutely beautiful there, and so I can totally understand how he wanted to take photos of the wintry, scenery around the lake. And even though the January snow was roughly 90 inches deep at the time, he was still confident that he was prepared for a pretty short trip. He packed a plastic sheet for cover, insulated winter clothing, assorted camping supplies, all in a sturdy backpack, and he also had enough food with him to last for the entire weekend. Before he left Eugene on January 29th, he reportedly told his friend that if he was not back by February 1st, they should call the police to report him missing, which sounds pretty dramatic. I mean, that's not really the way I would phrase it personally. And for me, knowing how this story ends, Charles' warning to his friend is especially spooky because he clearly seemed to understand that there was at least some level of danger that he was walking into. And on top of that, we've heard tons of these missing hiker stories that involve people who were way more irresponsible than Charles was. If you've seen other videos that I've put out, I mean, I've covered people who didn't tell anyone where they were going or what their plan was, right? But Charles did the opposite of that. He communicated his plans to his friends. He told them where he was going, his return date, and he was even regularly calling to update his parents back home throughout his entire road trip, right? The fact that Charles was not your typical lost hiker is honestly part of what makes this story so chilling. Now, it's important to note that Charles also packed the keys to his Volkswagen van in his backpack, but he did not bring the car with him. He left it in Eugene, and instead, he hopped onto a bus and then later stuck his thumb out and hitchhiked, and ultimately would end up traveling by foot to Crater Lake. Now, some folks will debate how, safe the hitchhiking element of his plan really was, but honestly, that's kind of futile because you have to remember that this was the 1970s in America, and it honestly wasn't that unusual to just kind of hitchhike or float freely from place to place like this. Whether it was safe or not, Charles was a young man looking for adventure, and so on January 29th, he took a Greyhound bus from Eugene, Oregon, all the way to Roseburg. Now, I want you to pay very close attention to the timeline here. It's a little kind of all over the place. I'll do my best. We don't know for sure when Charles arrived in Roseburg, but it's been estimated that it was probably around maybe 3:50 in the afternoon, something like that. And the question of Charles's arrival time in Roseburg is actually the first of many frustrating breakdowns when it comes to the documents and chain of evidence that could have seriously changed the result of this case. But regardless, from Roseburg, Charles's friend confirmed that he planned to hitchhike the rest of the way into the park, which was a long ways, by the way, from Roseburg. And by 6:30 p.m. that very same night, Charles was seen at the Dry Creek store on the road to Crater Lake. We don't know who might have given Charles a ride to this store, but since he had managed to travel so far from Roseburg in such a short amount of time, authorities are pretty confident that he did, in fact, hitchhike most of the way. Eyewitnesses claim to have seen Charles at the store and confirmed that they saw no sign of physical injury at the time. I mean, I'm sure he was probably a little cold and maybe a little weary from all of his methods of travel, the hitchhiking and being outside and stuff, but Charles was still unharmed and unthreatened by the end of his first day on the road. And the same was true early the next morning on January 30th. It's assumed that Charles camped overnight somewhere near the Dry Creek store because we do know that he was able to hitch another ride with a logging truck driver this time that he met at that store. And so from there, the truck driver took Charles east towards Crater Lake. Now, I've hitchhiked a little bit in my days, almost exclusively when I was backpacking or thru hiking, but I wouldn't call myself a pro. With that said, I do know one very important rule of hitchhiking, which is that you can only hitch as far as your driver is going. And unfortunately, the logging truck either had to turn down a remote road or something like that, or had to avoid the snowy weather because Charles was eventually dropped off near Stump Lake, which is still a whopping 30 miles away from Crater Lake. After they parted ways, this driver saw him walking east along the highway, and this, tragically, was the last confirmed sighting of Charles McCullar before he was never heard from again, at least as far as we know. Now, I hiked through Crater Lake in the summer of 2022, and unlike Charles McCullar's hike, mine was extremely hot. I was there in the middle of the summer. It was just about the complete opposite circumstance, but luckily for me, I had Drink Element with me. Was that a good segue? Was that too cheesy? I don't know. We're gonna run with it. So Drink Element is the sponsor of this video. They're also just the best electrolyte drink mix company in the game. They have so many amazing flavors, like lemonade salt. Have you guys heard about this yet? If you haven't, oh boy, you're in for a treat. They recently launched lemonade salt, it tastes so good. It's so refreshing after you've been sweating, working out, hiking, doing anything at all. And it's really cool that it tastes so good because you might be surprised to learn that it does not have any sugar in it, unlike pretty much all the other electrolyte drink mix companies out there. Element is committed to giving you amazing flavors and amazing taste without any of the junk and BS that you find in so many other companies' drinks. They also have this really underrated sparkling water too, which I feel like I should talk about more when I do these ad reads, but that's really amazing too. In fact, actually, here's what you should do right now. Go to drinkelement.com/KyleHatesHiking. That's drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking, and go make a purchase of either lemonade salt or the Element sparkling water. And when you do that through my link, you're gonna get a sample pack of 8 additional Element flavors thrown in with your order for no extra cost. This sample pack has all of the customer favorites in it, so you're gonna get to try a bunch of different amazing flavors. And I mean, it's essentially free Element too. So why wouldn't you do that? Are you crazy? That was kind of mean. You're not crazy, but I would really appreciate it if you went to drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking, and you're gonna get a little something out of it too. I love Element. They've been a huge supporter of this channel, so you're also supporting the channel when you do this. And so click that link and let's get back to the story. So we're about to get even deeper into this very strange story, but before we do that, I need to introduce you to a very important man. This man is Charles McCullar Sr. He's the father, right? And he's also one of the more colorful, we'll say, characters involved with this case. He was a former military officer, and he just wasn't the kind of man who was gonna let his son go missing without putting up a massive fight, right? And he certainly wasn't the kind of man who would tolerate any failure to act from the authorities or anyone else in power at the time. So when Charles didn't return from his hike, his friend that he had talked to right before he left did end up reporting him missing, which was on February 2nd. However, Charles's parents back in Virginia wouldn't end up being notified that their son was, gone until February 10th. To this day, we don't really have any real answers as to why it took the authorities so long to tell the McCullars, but it's safe to say that the delayed communication did not sit well with Charles Sr. He started writing. He wrote these unapologetic letters to senators, governors, even the FBI. Hell, in one of them, Charles Sr. even demands that the FBI give the search for his son the same resources and attention that they were giving to the ongoing nationwide investigation into the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. Now, for those of you who might not be familiar, Jimmy Hoffa is essentially one of the most famous missing people of all time, right? He was this notorious mob-connected Union leader who disappeared the very same year that Charles did in July of 1975. I don't know how to stress this more. I mean, I wasn't around back then, but Hoffa was just a massive deal, right? I mean, this guy was portrayed in movies by actors like Jack Nicholson and Al Pacino, and still, Charles Sr. refused to be starstruck or told that any one man was more important than his son, even if this man was making massive headlines. And honestly, I can't help but respect his constant push for justice. Charles Sr. wrote, quote, "I decided that the McCullar family would pursue all avenues available to receive the same magnitude of federal assistance as was offered to the Hoffa family. Charles Sr. was gonna fight for all the attention that he could get, even if it meant literally filling the FBI's mailbox one letter at a time." He was resourceful and he wasn't afraid to just kind of tell it like it is, right? I mean, he was just super, super hungry for an explanation, and his son's missing. I mean, can we really blame him? So let's go back to the current timeline for a second here. There was a part of Charles Sr.'s independent investigation where he claimed to have interviewed a person that spotted someone matching his son's description on January 30th at a resort along the way to Crater Lake called Diamond Lake. It's right outside the park. I've been close to it. I was supposed to go there once and I didn't, but that's another story. I will say though, there's no record of Charles ever checking in to Diamond Lake Resort, and the resort manager even provided Charles Sr. with a list of all the guests that had stayed there that night. And after sending a photograph of Charles to all of the resort guests on that list, none of them would confirm seeing Charles there. Absolutely no one. And yet, Charles Sr. still wouldn't accept this outcome. He took things a step further when he asked the police to perform background checks on every single resort guest from that night. But the Oregon State Police obviously refused to perform that kind of mass background check. I mean, wouldn't that just be an obvious violation of the Fourth Amendment and just the guests' overall right to privacy? I mean, clearly Charles Sr. was very bold and he just wasn't afraid to ask for any resource he could possibly get. However, other than this unknown person he talked to who claimed to have seen someone that looked like Charles at Diamond Lake, there's absolutely zero hard evidence that Charles was ever there at all. As far as we can tell, Charles likely ended up taking an even deadlier route into Crater Lake National Park. I mentioned this earlier, but I want to bring it up again just because it's so important. The snow in Crater Lake at this time was just extremely deep. I mean, it had gotten so bad that the north entrance to the park, which was the entrance that Charles was heading towards, was currently impassable. It was closed. And it also didn't help that the north entrance isn't really that close to Charles's desired destination, which is, of course, Crater Lake itself. It's thought that Charles would have just continued walking along the highway since it would have had the least amount of snow on it. It would have been the path of least resistance. But we also know that he was behind schedule at this point and that he would never make it back to Eugene to reunite with his friends. When the search for Charles began, it was conducted by the Cascade Rescue Emergency Search Team using pickup trucks, snowmobiles, and a total of 169 man-hours. They searched and searched and searched. And Charles Sr. was even able to convince some local pilots to fly him around the area for like a bird's eye view down into Crater Lake. But unfortunately, they had basically started searching too late, and the snowfall continued. It was only getting thicker by this point, and once again, there was no sign of Charles or of his body. Charles Sr., of course, never gave up, and he kept relentlessly writing those letters. But despite that effort, this case would quickly end up going cold, at least for a while. Now, before we get to the wild ending to this story, I do want to just take some time to kind of comb through some of the potential theories that were being floated around at the time that might explain Charles's disappearance. And I want to start with Charles Sr. once again. If you were to ask him, he would have told you that there was foul play involved somehow. Charles Sr. suspected that his son might have been picked up by someone dangerous while he was hitchhiking, and then this unknown driver potentially like abducted and murdered him. And I mean, that definitely could have happened, right? But I will remind you that most of Charles Sr.'s theories are based purely on his like fatherly intuition. He never really had any real evidence of this potentially murderous driver out there. And his obsession with the foul play theory might have been amplified by the enormous amount of grief that he felt for his missing son. I mean, obviously, like, we can't blame him for that, right? Maybe this theory was his way of kind of just explaining the unexplainable. Now, of course, as I've covered many times on this channel, the simplest explanation for any death or disappearance in the wild would be that it was just a complete accident, right? Like, these things do happen. I mean, it's possible that the massive amount of snow was just too much for Charles to handle. If he had taken a wrong turn or made a mistake, you know, anything like that, he could have easily found himself stuck outside in deadly temperatures for much longer than he planned, and ultimately died from exposure to the elements. And of course, a theory that's always discussed in these cases is that maybe he had some kind of run-in with wildlife. I mean, there's bears up there, there's mountain lions. Maybe this theory is a little out there, you know, since the snow is so crazy. I'm not an expert, but I'm assuming all the animals were probably either hibernating or kind of waiting out the storm. But it's my job to talk through every possible explanation, and so some sort of animal attack is definitely still one of them. Those are all the primary theories about what might have happened, as vague as they are. But ultimately, it would end up being nearly 18 months after Charles initially went missing that everyone involved would finally get some real answers. And to be honest, these answers were nothing short of shocking. On October 18th, 1976, a pair of hikers in Crater Lake National Park stumbled across a weathered backpack that had a set of car keys inside of it in a very remote area near Bybee Creek. And when they reported this to the authorities, it was soon discovered that these car keys matched the same kind of Volkswagen van that Charles McCullar was known to drive. When park rangers returned for a deeper search of the Bybee Creek area, they would go on to discover even more disturbing evidence. Rangers reported that they found a pair of jeans on the ground. And listen closely here, because this is really bizarre and kind of hard to explain, honestly. So these jeans were like unbuttoned and the belt was undone. And, you know, a random pair of jeans like that is weird enough to find in the woods on any given day. But that's nothing compared to the fact that when those jeans were found, they were standing in an upright vertical position. That's right. They were vertical. I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this. From what I've read, it's likely that these jeans had like stiffened over time to the point where the pants were able to just kind of like hold their shape and stand upright on their own. Does that make sense? This crude photo is like the best way I can explain it, though it still doesn't look quite right. There did happen to be a nearby log where it looked like the owner of the pants had been possibly sitting down at one point, but from everything I've seen, these pants were just standing up straight all by themselves. This next part wasn't easy for me to confirm, so I don't know, a little shaky, but apparently multiple news reports quoted Park Ranger Marion Jack saying that the view of these vertical pants made him feel as if a human had, quote, melted into the ground. Yeah, I told you at the start of this story that this was going to be some unsettling stuff, so you can't say I didn't warn you, but it's also too late for you to turn back now either, isn't it? To make this story even more bizarre, the Rangers looked inside of those jeans only to find a broken off human shin bone. Oh, and a pair of socks were still in there too. And those socks were also filled with foot bones. And even worse, most of the rest of this mysterious skeleton was nowhere to be found, except for a jawbone, which was found nearby, and the crown of a skull, which was found 12 feet away from this vertical pair of jeans. Which, like, even just saying the phrase vertical pair of jeans out loud makes me feel a bit crazy, but that's exactly what the Rangers said that they found there. There were a few other scattered pieces of equipment found nearby, including some additional clothing that was laid out on a nearby log. And to that, the Rangers believe that these other clothes were actually laid out by the hikers who had originally sorted through the backpack and all the other items. Although I will say some internet theories often point to how weird the layout of the clothes seemed when paired with the weirdness of the jeans and the whole scene. Rangers also found some food packaging kind of littered around, including an empty can of Vienna sausages and an empty M&M's wrapper. Now, I'm not a very morbid person, but if I were to create a menu for my own last meal, we'll say, I would have to think long and hard about whether or not to eat a combination of M&M's and Vienna sausages for it. But hey, that's just me. Comment below what your last meal would be. Actually, maybe don't do that. That's really weird. Anyway, so now they had located this backpack, some human remains, a strange pair of jeans, and some snack wrappers and stuff like that. But obviously, this is a story about a missing young photographer. And strangely enough, no one reported finding a camera, which kind of left the authorities to wonder, was this actually Charles McCullar, or could this gruesome scene have belonged to a completely different missing hiker? Well, that question would get answered pretty quickly. Obviously, they found all these bones, and so it was time for science to tell us who this mystery skeleton really was. And after looking at all of the evidence, the Volkswagen car keys, the location of the remains, and ultimately the dental records from the jawbone, authorities were able to confirm that those hikers in October were, in fact, unlucky enough to stumble across the final resting place of Charles McCullar. The skull they found didn't show any sign of damage or foul play, and so the official cause of death was ruled as natural causes. The theory put forward by park rangers is that Charles McCullar would have traveled further along the highway and decided to enter the park through an unofficial entrance that ended up being the closest that he could possibly get to the lake. And he then became lost in the snow near Bybee Creek and may have even been trying to cross it, on top of all the snow before falling, suffering an injury, and ultimately succumbing to the elements. And then when the snow melted in the spring, animals likely consumed some of his remains, as weird as it is to say that, and kind of spread them around in the forest. And to be honest with you guys, I think that sounds pretty plausible, but there still are some aspects to this case that leave me super confused. Charles Sr., on the other hand, did not agree with this official theory from the park rangers, right? He believed that someone hurt Charles. Either it was a driver on the road or another hiker in the park. That part's not clear, but he really believed that whoever hurt Charles also moved his body to the remote area of Bybee Creek and then just left him there, stealing his camera and a few other valuables. And again, you can't really blame him for this, right? I mean, after going such a long time without any answers about what happened to his son, the discovery of his remains only raised even more questions. Like, for instance, what happened to his son's camera? I mean, photography was the whole reason that Charles was in the park in the first place, but his nice camera was nowhere to be found at the scene of his death. And as far as I'm aware, to this day, no one has ever reported finding this camera or any camera gear, anything camera related in the area. Another question is, how could Charles have ended up at Bybee Creek? I mean, Bybee Creek is nearly 12 miles from the entrance of the park, and Charles Sr. was told by park rangers at the time of the disappearance that no one could have traveled more than a mile or two into the park through 90 inches of snow without using snowshoes or skis, neither of which Charles had. And of course, probably the strangest question is, why were Charles's pants undone and left in such a unnerving, weird position like that? And while I can't answer for why the pants were vertical, I can possibly answer to why they were kind of ditched like that. I'm sure a lot of you know this, but when a person is experiencing hypothermia, they're known to go through something called paradoxical undressing, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's when someone gets so cold that their body starts to get confused and actually starts to make them feel too hot. This sensation leads many victims of hypothermia to actually take their clothing off, which obviously only exposes them to the elements even more. Most people who end up reading about Charles McCullar's story tend to agree that he could have been experiencing hypothermia, and that would explain at least some of the strangeness surrounding his pants, but definitely not all of it. I don't know, guys. I'm gonna leave this one up to you. I really don't know how to feel about it. What do you guys think of Charles Sr.'s theories? Do you think that Charles McCullar could have been murdered or, you know, been a victim of foul play? Or do you think he simply just died an accidental backcountry death? I'd consider myself a pretty open-minded guy, so I'm willing to entertain most of these theories if someone comes up with a good argument, especially related to the absence of the camera. I think that's a really compelling, mysterious part of this case as well. And so let me know what you guys think. Respectfully, please keep your comments respectful. I appreciate you guys so much. Oh, and YouTube seems to think that you'll enjoy watching this video next, so give it a click, and I'll see all of you in the next video. Thanks so much for being the best subscribers. I appreciate you guys so much.